in the early 90s. A burgundy Ford Taurus I named Fred. My oldest brother, Carrie, made me a mixtape to listen to while driving. It had the Breeders and REM, Elvis Costello, and U2. And it made me feel cool as hell riding around with other people, especially since my musical taste until this point consisted mostly of musical theater and whatever the poppiest top 40 hit was. But Carrie took his role as big brother very seriously, especially when it came to influencing me. So there were 4 of us all together. My other older brother, Jason, was 5 years younger than Carrie and his polar opposite. My younger sister, Nora, was 16 years younger than Carrie, meaning she barely shared a home with him and had a more distant relationship with him. But I was 11 years younger than him, putting me in the perfect sweet spot to know him well and yet be distant enough from him to absolutely worship him. So I was Carrie's project, and I reveled in the attention. He showed me almanacs and told me about faraway places I should visit, like France with its castles and amazing food. And when he found out I was taking French in high school, he bought me a book about Claude Monet, and suddenly I was obsessed with Impressionistic art. When I studied in France and visited a museum dedicated to the work of Monet, Carrie wanted to hear every detail upon my return. You know, so much of what I think of as uniquely me is actually what Carrie molded me to be. So when Carrie gave me the mixtape, he told me to get into the car, and he pushed my passenger seat back as far as it would go to accommodate his over 6-foot frame, and he told me to drive. Now, although we only overlapped for 7 years in our house, we had similar experiences. Our father was a very violent, volatile narcissist, and our mother was his enabler. So if we were going to have any quality time, it would have to be anywhere other than the house. Now, our family lived in Upton, a town of roughly 1,000 people off of I-65, but stubbornly far away from civilization, at least in 1992. So going for a drive was an activity itself, and frequently didn't end in a destination. So as I rounded the twists and turns of our rural roads, Carrie good-naturedly told me to pick up the pace and stop driving like a granny. This would be one of the few areas where we differed. He drove like a bat out of hell, and I'm still tailgated by everyone everywhere I go. But with each song, he'd sing a bit and then pause it to tell me why this song mattered. "This is Elvis Costello," he said, his enthusiasm bubbling. "He's a genius. I put Allison on here because I think you'll like it, but my favorite is Watching the Detectives." And he hit play again, reveling in the part where Elvis crooned, "Ooh, it's so cute." Yeah, but then his tone turned more reverent as the first chords of U2's Where the Streets Have No Name came on. "People don't understand that Bono is singing about heaven in this song. He's not in your face about his faith like a lot of people in Mom's church. He's more personal about it." Inwardly, I braced myself. Yeah, I was already starting to pull away from my family's Southern Baptist church, and I was not in the mood to listen to religious music. Yeah, on top of that, Carrie had been a youth minister before he decided to go to law school. So I was worried I was in for a sermon. But the chords of the song filled both Fred and my poor withered heart, and I couldn't help but feel it. I want to run, I want to hide, I want to tear down the walls that hold me inside. Yeah. Sorry. But I also wanted to run. I wanted to hide. And I wanted to tear down the godforsaken walls of my dysfunctional family. I felt tears coming to my eyes, and I saw Carrie watch me with silent approval. Now, long after Carrie returned to Virginia to go back to law school, I continued to listen to his tape in my car. And I continued to rewind the U2 songs and sing them over and over again. And while Where the Streets Have No Name reeled me in, with or without, tied me down. That feeling of loving someone so much that you wanted them so badly, and yet their presence was damaging to you, that was achingly familiar to me. I mean, romantically, yes, but also in a familial way. All I wanted was the love of those around me who could not give it for one reason or another. And then somewhere around 1997, Carrie's mixtape was destroyed. I was home from college, and someone broke into my car and ravaged everything. Please don't ever talk to me about how much better life is in small towns, okay? I mean, small towns have bored teens who break into cars and eviscerate precious mixtapes. Okay, as a person prone to over-dramatizing everything, much like Carrie, I see this now as symbolic. Life really shifted for us around this time. I was gaining a much stronger sense of myself in college, which obviously irritated him. What's with this Tori Amos you're always listening to? Why do you wear so much plaid? You look like a lumberjack. You know, he had his own life now in Las Vegas with a wife who was expecting a child of their own. And with the pressures of parenthood, which I now fully understand, he was distracted and less adoring. He sometimes even became irritated with me, which had never happened before. Maybe it was because he was headstrong, or maybe it was because we lived so far apart, or maybe it was because I'd become incredibly distracted with my own life after moving to New York City. But I missed what I now know were the signs of his mental decline. Around 2000, he stopped speaking to every member of his family over a very minor misunderstanding. He'd had tumultuous times with each of our siblings before, but never me. I called him multiple times, but he refused to answer. So, as I was trained to do in my screwed up family, I hardened my heart to him. And from that point on, his relationship with all of us was a roller coaster. He visited me in New York, and he was his old convivial self. But then just a few years later, he refused to come to our grandmother's funeral. He and I talked and laughed on the phone for hours, but at my wedding, he became sullen, refused to dance, even though he'd always adored my husband. He abandoned his successful law practice after his wife divorced him to go on a 500-mile trek in Spain called the Santiago del Camino, which was an incredible thing to do, if not also very irresponsible and impulsive. He lost a great deal of money and sometimes would come to stay with our mom, who still lived in that tiny town. Both he and I couldn't wait to flee. And then he'd get angry at her and go back to Vegas and ghost us all again for months at a time. But in the late summer of 2020, my whole family was at the parking lot funeral of someone near to us who had died of COVID. Carrie pulled me aside, took off his mask for a moment to chat with me. He looked terrifying. And it wasn't just that he was older, but he had dark circles under his eyes, and those eyes looked crazed. "Randy," he said, "what are we gonna do? This is the beginning of the end." Carrie and I were the only Democrats in a family of Republicans, so I had a vague idea that he was talking about Trump's handling, or not, of the COVID crisis. But then he continued to talk about how society was going to collapse, and there was no hope for any of us. I cried a lot that afternoon. I cried for the loss of our family friend, and for my own fear of COVID, and for the future of our country. But I also cried for Carrie, because it was obvious that something was really, really wrong, and I had no idea what to do about it. About a week and a half before this past Christmas, Mom texted us all that Carrie was going to go to Las Vegas again. He'd been living with her since that funeral parking lot, and his mental health had deteriorated greatly. He stopped speaking to all the siblings and even kept to himself in the basement when we all came to visit. He was not kind to my mother, and we all tried desperately to get her to tell him to leave. But when she told us he was going to Vegas, we were all relieved. It meant we could visit her house on Christmas without the weird anxiety of knowing he was lurking silently beneath us. But then we received the text that he collapsed at his hotel in Vegas, and he was in the hospital. And then the follow-up text that it was a colossal heart attack, exacerbated by undiagnosed and advanced type 2 diabetes. And then, eventually, the text that he was dead. I was at my job as a middle school teacher when that last text pinged. It was the Friday before winter break, and I was in charge of the karaoke room that we had as an option for our Fun Friday. The students were singing What I Know Now from Beetlejuice, the musical, a song about how short life is. And it contained the line, "'Cause life is short, but death is super long." Carrie would have found the song funny, and the timing even funnier. The moment he was gone, and I knew I could never see him again, the old Carrie flooded me. The past 20 years of anxiety and anger and confusion at his behavior just melted. All I could see was that charming guy sitting in my car, animated, joyful about his music, and the act of sharing it with me. He was no longer the family's best-kept secret asshole. He was my big brother who knew everything and adored me, and even when nobody else did. I'll never understand what happened to him, but I have a theory that it was a combination of the PTSD we all suffered from our awful home. But his must have been compounded by multiple untreated concussions he endured playing football in the machismo 80s, when the idea of seeking medical treatment made you a pussy. The timing of his decline fits perfectly with what we understand now about the condition known as CTE, All I know is if his mental health problems were a physical entity, I'd kick the shit out of that entity for stealing my brother. So, Carrie's memorial service is this Saturday. My other siblings and I have worked in unusual harmony to plan an event that will honor the man he was underneath it all. And in the sleight of hand and twist of fate that you too sang about, I'm in charge of making the playlist for the visitation. It has Where the Streets Have No Name, of course, and Watching the Detectives, which may possibly be one of the most unusual songs ever played at a memorial. But it also has With or Without You. Because while I found it nearly impossible to live with his behavior, especially when it was directed toward my mother in recent years, I don't know how I'm going to live without my